Top 3 photos with disturbing backstories, part 19 by MrBallen's. What's good? How you day going? Morning, evening, night, whenever you're watching this video. Look, real quick, we're gonna kick a little bit of ish on this video, then we're gonna get right to it, whatever. This freaking thumbnail and this first story, we're gonna see leap of faith. A competition leads to an unfortunate miscalculation. I can't help but to think, like, do we know this story already? Did we see this somewhere, like a single story, or someone else told the story? But is this the story? I could be wrong though, but this is the one where the guy, okay, let's say, I think he was always trying to outdo the competition, like always trying to be the best. He was making like these crazy attempts, doing like these crazy jumps and ish or whatever. Don't remember what he was doing exactly, around the way of parkour or some ish. I don't remember exactly, but he ended up wanting to really do it big. Was like, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and do this, make this jump off of this freaking bridge, and the police like stopping him, like, yo, don't do this, this is dangerous. People were trying to stop him also, but low-key, you know, they were there to watch. But regardless though, right, he ended up having like this flyer, and he was like, yo, I'm gonna be here this particular date, this time, be there to watch me do it. So the police, of course, are like, all right, we're gonna be there and we're gonna arrest your ass. But actually what he did was pop up on the other side of the bridge with a horse and carriage, and I think from there shit went south. I could be wrong, but either way it go, as I gotta stop saying that, I always say it a lot, but either way it go though. I can't help but to think this is that story that we already watched. If we did, I will let you know. The reason why I know I didn't watch this video in entirety is because this freaking #1 story, Lifeline, yo, this sounds trippy as hell. The Earth equivalent of being lost in outer space. Sounds like, if there's going to direction, I'm thinking someone's going to end up on a part of this planet, huh? Or it's just going to seem like, yo, this is infinite. I'm stuck. I don't know, though. I know one thing, if it is that story, then I just spoiled the shit out of it.
Today, I'm going to share with you 3 progressively more disturbing stories, and at the end of each of them, I will share the photo that is famously associated with them. But before we get into today's stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you come to the right channel, because that's all we do, and we upload 3 or 4 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, the next time the like button asks for a phone charger, give them your broken one that only works when you bend the cord at a certain angle. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's story.
Gotta mute it. Copyright.
On December 17th, 1903, the Wright brothers successfully flew the world's first motor-operated airplane. By 1910, airplanes had improved to the point where they were considered a reasonable form of travel, and so people began focusing on how to make them safer. One big safety concern with airplanes at the time was there was no parachute small enough or light enough to be taken on board with passengers. And so if the plane malfunctioned and was crashing, everybody had to go down with it. So in 1911, a prominent French aviation club offered a large sum of money to anybody who could design a parachute for airplane passengers. A man named Franz Reichelt, who was a tailor in Paris, but who had always had a fascination with aviation, saw this reward in the paper and decided to take on this challenge. The design he came up with was not an external device.
I don't think we saw this one. I don't think this that one.
Tailor in Paris, but who had always had a fascination with aviation, saw this reward in the paper and decided to take on this challenge. The design he came up with was not an external device, like a backpack. Instead, it was a full suit with foldable bat wings that attached to the passenger's arms and connected all the way down to their ankles. Using his sewing know-how, he stitched up this totally bizarre-looking prototype, and he attached it to a dummy and threw it off of his apartment building. And amazingly, the dummy landed lightly on the ground. But when Franz, who significantly outweighed this dummy, put on his parachute suit and leapt off of the building himself, he did not touch the ground lightly. He smashed into the ground and broke his leg. But Franz was undeterred. He made dozens of changes to his suit, he added material, he subtracted material, and after a while, he felt like it was ready to be submitted to this French aviation club. But when the club members watched one of Franz's dummies wearing the suit come crashing into the ground because the canopy collapsed, they rejected his design. Franz assured them his design could work, they just needed to see it in action from a slightly higher altitude. The canopy needed more time to fully inflate. But the club members were not buying it, and they told Franz he should just give up on the design. Franz was offended and decided he would prove them wrong. So in 1911, Franz began petitioning to the city of Paris to allow him to test his design off of the Eiffel Tower. He thought if he jumped from one of their platforms, that would be high enough for his canopy to fully inflate, thereby showing that his design really did work. And so for a year, the city of Paris repeatedly rejected Franz every time he asked for the chance to do this. But in 1912, something changed and the city said, okay, you know what, Franz? You can test your parachute on the Eiffel Tower. But what the city didn't know, because Franz...
I don't know if it's just the way I'm hearing the story, because I can't picture anyone to just do that. But it sounded like a, you know what, fuck it, go ahead and do it type of answer. No, I'd have told dog too many damn times. Fuck it, let him go ahead and do it.
You know what, Franz? You can test your parachute on.
Go ahead, dog.
But what the city
we ain't
didn't
responsible
know,
for shit.
because Franz had intentionally kept it secret from them, was he didn't intend to launch a dummy off of the Eiffel Tower wearing his suit. He was going to put the parachute suit on and jump off these 17 stories himself. And so on February 4th of that year, Franz arrived at the tower, and standing around the base of it was a throng of people and journalists who had all read about this experiment in the newspaper. And so when Franz got out and promptly put on his parachute suit, the crowd gasped. They couldn't believe he was going to be the one jumping off of the tower. And none of Franz's friends or family knew he was going to be jumping off the tower himself. And so they pleaded with him not to do this. Throw a dummy off. You should not be jumping off. This is not going to work. Legend has it, Franz turned to one of his friends and he said, "You will see that my 72 kilos and my parachute will give your arguments the most decisive of denials." Then Franz promptly turned around and began walking up the stairs towards the platform. And with him was a journalist who brought a camera. Once Franz reached the platform, the journalist began filming him. And his video would capture Franz climbing up onto the railing and then hesitating. And he anxiously begins kind of rocking back and forth like he's debating whether he's really going to do this. And then at some point, he works up the courage and he jumps. And immediately his suit collapses and he slams into the ground, dying instantly. Another cameraman was on the ground and he filmed Franz's final jump. Here is a still shot of Franz right before impact.
What the fuck, dog? This nigga's told your ass, man. Look, and I get it. I ain't gonna lie to you. You really feel like you had something to prove. Really feel like you had the math figured out. Because, okay, testing it on a dummy, I can see this. Like, yo, no, I know the reason why this is not working. Because, sure, it may be built like a human, but it's not built like a freaking human. It doesn't have the same way. It's, you know, it's not gonna do the things it has to do in the air to kind of figure out and adjust to catch the wind. Like, it's just gonna be a little ragdoll type of situation. So it's like, yeah, I gotta test this, whatever. But hey, I'm quite sure he was aware this was a possibility. Others warned him, let him know, yo, this is a possibility, and he still went with it. So at that point, shit happens. I'm sorry. You can say what you want to say, dog. He knew that shit was a possibility, a huge possibility. Didn't work, dog. Good thing we got them backpacks. I wish I would give it a play. They give you that shit. Like, he go, your shit, boy. The fuck is this? Niggas be on the plane looking like Batman.
And at some point, he works up the courage and he jumps, and immediately his suit collapses and he slams into the ground, dying instantly. Another cameraman was on the ground and he filmed Franz's final jump. Here is a still shot of Franz right before impact.
I can't even make out what it is. I'm not even gonna lie. But look like that nigga was saying, oh shit.
45-year-old Florida man Mike Moylan suddenly shot up in bed and grabbed the sides of his head, wincing in pain. He had a blinding headache. He squinted across the room at the alarm clock. It was 4:30 in the morning on June 28, 2007. Mike got out of bed and tried to stand up, but he immediately got dizzy, so he sat back down again, took a couple of deep breaths, and then he stood up again, and this time he was steady on his feet. He walked across his bedroom into his bathroom, where he opened the medicine cabinet, grabbed some painkillers, swallowed 3 of them, and then walked back into his bedroom. Before he lay down again, he noticed there was a dark spot on his pillow. Now, it was dark in his room, so he couldn't really tell what it was, and his wife April was fast asleep in bed with him, so he didn't want to flip the lights on and wake her up, but he had a feeling that that spot was likely blood. And so he ran his hands all over his head to see if there was blood coming off of him, and he found some on his right ear. And so he thought to himself, well, I guess my wife must have elbowed me in my sleep. That's why I'm bleeding, and that's why my head hurts. And so feeling content that that was what happened, he laid back down and waited for the meds to kick in so he could sleep. But after 30 minutes of complete restlessness, not only had the meds done nothing, it seemed like his headache was getting progressively worse and his ear continued to bleed. And suddenly Mike thought to himself, wait a minute, what if I have an aneurysm that's burst, and that's why there's blood leaking out of my ear onto the pillow? A brain aneurysm is the bulging or ballooning of a blood vessel in the brain, and if it ruptures, it can be fatal. And so now, feeling scared that he was dying, Mike woke up his wife April and told her, we gotta go to the hospital right away. And April, who's half asleep, seemed very confused, but eventually got the message, and they got up, they hopped in her car, and she drove them to the emergency room. As soon as they got there, doctors x-rayed Mike's head, Afterwards, when Mike and April were sitting in an exam room, a nurse walked in holding onto an X-ray image, and she held it up to the light and she pointed to a foreign object in Mike's skull, and she says, "Well, it looks like you got shot." Mike couldn't believe it, and neither could the nurse or any of the doctors. He should have been dead. April, who was apparently so overcome with emotions, ran out.
My bad, I just got done watching that chapter, bro. All right, let me let this finish, because did she fucking shoot me? It probably was a stray or a setup. Let it finish. You ain't sleep. You just fucking shot me. Still got the pistol. I went back quite a bit. Yo, I was not expecting that, dog.
Held it up to the light and she pointed to a foreign object in Mike's skull, and she says, "Well, it looks like you got shot." Mike couldn't believe it, and neither could the nurse or any of the doctors. He should have been dead. April, who was apparently so overcome with emotions, ran out of the room, and Mike was quickly ushered into emergency surgery, where after a couple of hours, they were able to remove the bullet from his head. As Mike lay in his hospital bed recovering from the surgery with his wife next to him, the police showed up and began asking questions about what happened, and they initially just believed that a stray bullet must have entered the home and struck Mike in the side of his head. But after speaking to the couple, April revealed that she slept with a pistol underneath her pillow,
and that
maybe it had fired accidentally. And then when they really dug...
Bro, I shouldn't do this. I know. I play with my guns like every day. I ain't gonna lie to you, dog. It is not easy as people make it out to seem like, oh, you can mistakenly shoot this. Don't get me wrong. It can happen. Oh, it will happen. I'm not saying it don't happen. Don't take it as that. What I'm saying is, dog, it's really hard a good amount of the times to mistakenly like pull this trigger all the way down. Let's let it finish though. And the irony of the name, Mike, I'm like, ooh, I'm getting that chapter vibes. And I guess you already sleep with one in the head. Don't get me wrong, a lot of people do keep one in the head, which is dangerous, but...
And they initially just believed that a stray bullet must have entered the home and struck Mike in the side of his head. But after speaking to the couple, April revealed that she slept with a pistol underneath her pillow, and that maybe it had fired accidentally. And then when they really dug into this and they asked her more questions about this gun underneath her pillow, her story began to unravel, and eventually she would confess that she had in fact tried to kill Mike.
Thank you. I'm about to say, boy, with me laughing is gonna sound bad. I knew I wasn't tripping. Damn, man, that shit like, I'm about to get this insurance. Bam! And that nigga wake up and go take some aspirin. Who the fuck did I marry? Nigga, did I marry the Hulk? What the fuck? Bap, bap, bap. This nigga. Do you know how stupid you a fucking looking court? Legit tried to shoot this. We heard what happened, and it didn't work. This nigga got up and took some aspirin. Didn't even know what happened. I'm so glad he survived that shit. And I hope he didn't go through anything like traumatic that really affected his body. Psychological, I'm quite sure he took some pain there or whatever, but yeah, I hope he beat this shit like it's nothing. Sue her ass
with a pistol underneath her pillow, and that maybe it had fired accidentally. And then when they really dug into this and they asked her more questions about this gun underneath her pillow, her story began to unravel, and eventually she would confess that she had in fact tried to kill Mike and shot him while he was sleeping. She told police the reason she did it is she had recently destroyed one of the couple's successful businesses, but Mike had not found out about it yet. And so she decided she would kill him before he could...
So, sounds like, I'm gonna let it finish. What I noticed he said one of the, my bad, I'm going to true crime. One of the successful business. Meaning he have multiple out there, huh? Oh yeah, with Doggy out the picture, it is all mine. Stop playing. I'm gonna let it finish. I could be wrong. Maybe that really was the reason. Dumbass reason. Stop. Oh,
police, the reason she did it is she had recently destroyed one of the couple's successful businesses, but Mike had not found out about it yet. And so she decided she would kill him before he could find out. After her confession, Mike was crushed and felt like an idiot.
He probably wouldn't even
but he would tell police that there were a couple of red flags about his wife that he noticed on the night he actually woke up with this headache. For one, when he told her, hey, I want to go to the hospital because I'm bleeding out of my ear, she apparently took a really long time getting dressed and acted overly confused about what was happening, well beyond the I'm just tired routine. And then when...
Trying to prolong it so the shit can... Thinking like eventually the shit is going to kick in and actually do what it's supposed to do, huh? I ain't gonna lie, you will be thinking that, like, damn, I mean, how long can dog walk around with a bullet in the back of his head? Oh, that's bullshit, man. This shit is
overly
sick,
confused about what was
I'm
happening
about to get back
well
to this video.
beyond the "I'm just tired" routine. And then time getting dressed and acted overly confused about what was happening well beyond the "I'm just tired" routine. And then when they got in the car and were driving to the hospital, she was driving impossibly slow and he was asking her to speed up and she just wouldn't. And so Mike realized now that what she was really doing was hoping if she just delayed long enough, he might die before they reached the hospital. Obviously, he did not. April was jailed on attempted murder charges, but just a year after being in prison, she was released on a plea deal. Here is the image of Mike's x-ray where they discovered he had a bullet in his head.
I would love to see the video if it was like footage of when they in the room, when they bring in the x-ray and her honey chilling, chilling whatever. Oh gosh, we don't understand what happened here, but let me show you the x-ray and you just look, oh my God, you knew that motherfucking bullet was hitting me, bitch. Probably was playing loud music, probably was swerving and everything in the car. This shit pissing me off. But like I was saying, that sucked though, because a good amount of these is always the cases where it's like, damn, it's not just like, oh, I got a job, you got a job, and we just living. Like, it's like, no, like, I own this. I got this in our name, this in our name, this in our name. We own freaking vacation homes and shit. Like, what the fuck? And don't get me wrong, I know buddy don't buy happiness, and it does a good ass job of buying a portion of it. But regardless, dog, it's like, I always looked at it like, yo, if you got it, I got it. If I got it, you got it. So what the greed. I don't know. Let's watch the video, y'all. Lifeline. This story, y'all want to see what the hell.
One of the most insane jobs in the world is being a saturation diver for an oil and gas company. These highly specialized divers go down to extreme depths to do construction and demolition on underwater structures. The extreme pressure on their bodies from being so deep will cause some of the mixed gas they breathe to get trapped inside of their body. Now, this is harmless while it's happening, so while they're down at depth, this doesn't matter. But when they ascend, they have to do what's called decompression stops, where they basically stop in the water column at certain depths and just wait and allow these trapped gases to naturally come out of their body. Now, if they skip these decompression stops and just rush to the surface, those trapped gases will not leave their body and they will expand inside of them, causing a condition called decompression sickness, or the bends, and it can be fatal. Now, these decompression stops get longer and longer the deeper you go. And in the case of saturation divers, they'll go as deep as 2,000 feet. And for reference, in order to safely ascend from 2,000 feet, it would take you about 33 hours. And so these oil and gas companies can't afford to have their divers taking 33 hours in dives, and so they came up with a clever workaround. They built a pressurized chamber system on board ships and oil rigs where their divers would live in between their dives. And what this did was, by keeping their divers constantly under pressure, either literally underwater or in this system, the trapped gases inside of them didn't have a chance to expand, and so their divers couldn't get the bends. The divers would live inside of this incredibly cramped chamber for weeks at a time, getting transported to and from the seafloor inside of this small pressurized sphere that's called a dive bell that could detach from the chamber without totally depressurizing the whole system. At the end of these divers' multi-week shifts, they would do one long decompression stop inside of the chamber. And then when they were done, they'd step out of the chamber and they'd be fine again. In September of 2012, a 32-year-old saturation diver named Chris Lemons was on board a dive ship in the middle of the North Sea. He, along with 11 other divers, had just started a 4-week-long saturation shift. On the 12th of that month, Chris, along with 2 other divers named Dave and Duncan, were scheduled to perform routine maintenance on an oil platform 330 feet below the surface. The North Sea is notorious for terrible weather, but this day the weather was especially bad, and they considered not doing the dive, but ultimately they decided to do it anyways. As Chris, Dave, and Duncan put on their diving equipment and climbed from their living chamber through the tunnel into the dive bell, the captain of the ship navigated directly over this oil platform and then flipped on autopilot mode, which activated dynamic positioning. Now, dive ships rely heavily on dynamic positioning, which is really just this high-tech computer that makes sure, as soon as you turn it on, that the ship does not move from a particular spot in the water. So regardless of the swell swells and the wind, the ship stays steady. And this is really important when you have divers in the water because the dive bell is connected to the ship and the divers are connected to the dive bell. And so if the ship is moving all over the place, so is the dive bell, and so are the divers, making it impossible for the divers to do their job. Once the captain had the dynamic positioning up and running, the 3 divers sealed the door of the dive bell behind them, and then the dive bell was detached from the chamber and then lowered through a hole in the middle of the ship into the ocean. Once the bell got down to 330 feet, Chris opened up a hatch on the bottom of the dive bell that led directly into the water. Now, because the pressure inside the bell matches the pressure outside the bell, water does not come in through this hole. Duncan was the bellman for the night, so he would not be going out and doing any diving. He would be staying in the bell to support Dave and Chris. And so he helped them get their big helmets on and connected their umbilical to each of them. Sat divers, when they're outside of the bell, are completely reliant on their umbilical. It's this long stretch of tubes and wires that are connected directly to their suit and to their helmet, and it provides air as well as heat and electricity to their lights, and it provides radio communication up to the people on the boat. Once Chris and Dave were all set up, they slipped through the hole at the bottom of the bell, which brought them down to this little platform that was suspended right below the bell, and from there they leapt off all the way down to the sea floor. Now, sat divers will say that leap from that platform is both amazing and terrifying because once you leave the bell, it's completely pitch black all around you, so there's no reference point of how fast you're going or even how close to the ground you are. And so it feels like you're just sinking into this endless abyss before you crash into the ground. Once Chris and Dave did hit the ground, they stood up and began walking, and they were directed by the...
Imagine, real quick, imagine how beautiful this planet would be in your eyes if you had the balls to do shit like that. The reason why I say that, you probably someone watching this who do. I don't. I ain't gonna lie though. I'm not one of the people that hate on it though. I wish I did have them to do that. Like the stuff they see is just freaking, look, scary as shit. But hey, some people are trying to figure out this planet. Either way, go though. The stuff they see is like, yo, this is stuff I'll never ever see unless I watch it on a video. Freaking dry. Cottonmouth was killing me. But yeah, the stuff they'll see, I'll never see unless I see the shit on video, dog.
Close to the ground you are. And so it feels like you're just sinking into this endless abyss before you crash into the ground. Once Chris and Dave did hit the ground, they stood up and began walking, and they were directed by the radio in their helmet which direction they needed to go to reach this oil platform. The oil platform was 11 meters tall, and it looked like a sort of pyramid of these big steel pipes. They climbed up the side until they reached their respective working area, and then they settled in to do their job, which they expected to take about 6 hours. At first, everything was going to plan, but about an hour into the job, something went terribly wrong on the surface. The dynamic positioning computer failed. Now, the captain immediately saw it and just expected the backup computer to kick in and take over. But in a terrible turn of luck, the backup computer also failed. And so very quickly, this huge dive ship began drifting in the rough seas, dragging with it the dive bell and the divers 330 feet below. While the captain struggled to try to fix the system and get it back online and get the ship back on station, another crew member hopped on the radio and called down to Dave and Chris, who were outside of the dive bell, and told them to abandon the structure and get back in the bell ASAP. And Chris and Dave could tell from the urgency in this person's voice that this was no drill, this was serious. Chris and Dave were both positioned on the south side of the structure about halfway up, and their umbilicals were running straight up the structure and then northward because the ship was drifting northward. So neither Chris nor Dave could go around the structure. They needed to go straight up before being able to climb their umbilicals back up to the bell. And so both men began climbing, but they could feel the tension on their umbilical was getting tighter and tighter, and Dave managed to get all the way to the top, and he cleared the lip, and as soon as he was on top, he started getting pulled away from the structure. And he looked to see if Chris was also getting pulled, and all he saw was Chris's umbilical, impossibly stretched, still draped over the south side, and he could not see Chris. And that's when Dave, Duncan, and all the people on the surface heard Chris come over the radio frantically saying he was stuck on the underwater structure. His umbilical had gotten wrapped around one of the pylons. And so through the radio, Chris asked Duncan to give him more slack. But Duncan said, "There is no more slack. We are completely tight here. You have to get it free." And Chris would say, "I can't unfree it. It keeps getting tighter and tighter. I can't get it off the pylon." And so Dave jumped down onto the platform and tried to pull himself over to Chris, but his own umbilical was getting pulled towards the dive bell, and so he could not help Chris. And so Dave knew he couldn't do anything, so he turned and began crawling up his umbilical towards the dive bell, and as he's climbing, he hears behind him this extremely loud explosion. It sounded like a shotgun going off, and what it was Chris's umbilical snapping under the tension. As soon as the umbilical snapped, it sent Chris flying backwards off the structure, falling towards the ocean floor. Without his umbilical, he wouldn't have had light, he wouldn't have had a radio to talk to anybody up on the boat, he wouldn't have had heat, and the water was just barely above freezing, and so he would have been very cold very fast, and he would not have had an air supply. Although he would have had 2 backup canisters on his back that would automatically turn on. However, they only gave him 5 or maybe 6 minutes of air. And so when Chris hit the ocean floor, it would have been eerily quiet and totally, completely pitch black. He stood up at some point and looked around him and didn't see anything, but knew he had to get back to the underwater structure. It was his only chance of anybody finding him again. And so he had to make the impossible decision of just choosing a direction and blindly walking.
Man, what kind of reality is this, man? Dude, life, look, we've heard life-changing stories before. Fucked up. But this just sounds like a movie.
Had to make the impossible decision of just choosing a direction and blindly walking, not having any idea what you're walking towards. Choose wrong and you might walk over a cliff. But at some point, Chris made up his mind and just began walking in a single direction.
Give me a survival story.
And miraculously, he walked into the underwater structure. He climbed up the side until he got to the top, which was a flat metal grate. And there he looked around and saw there was no dive bell. There was no sign of anything. It was just him. He was completely all alone. And he must have known at this point that he was running out of air. He probably had maybe 1 or 2 minutes left. And so he would have been acutely aware that even if they're looking for him, they're not going to find him in time. He's going to die. And at some point, breathing would have become extremely difficult until there was no more air, and then he would have passed out and keeled over. Back on the surface, the captain was desperately trying to use manual controls to pilot the ship back over where Chris was, but because of how rough the seas were, it was proving to be nearly impossible. As the captain struggled, other members of the crew launched a remote-controlled vehicle into the water to at least go down and try to find Chris. And so they decided they would just pilot straight to the underwater structure and begin looking around that area. And so for a few anxious minutes, the crew on board the ship watched the camera, which was the live feed coming from this underwater vehicle, as it went through totally dark water. And then at some point on the screen, the structure just appeared, and the vehicle, as it went up towards the top, it got a look at the very top of the structure. And on the screen, they saw Chris lying on his side, totally motionless. At this point, he had been without air for at least 20 minutes. In a last-ditch effort, the captain decided to completely power off the ship and its computer and just do a hard reset, something that you would never do, especially in rough seas, because if it doesn't come back on again, you are dead in the water. But when they turned it back on again, the ship came on and the computer system came back online, including the dynamic positioning computer. So the captain immediately threw it on autopilot and the ship navigated right over where Chris's last position was. After Chris's umbilical had broken, Dave had managed to climb back up to the bell, and he was just standing underneath that platform right beneath it. And so when the ship got right back over Chris's position, Dave leapt off the platform, got to the seafloor, climbed up the structure, grabbed hold of Chris's body, and hauled him back up into the bell. Once Chris's body was inside the bell, Duncan, the bellman, removed Chris's helmet, and he saw that his face was blue and he was totally lifeless. But
risky A, boy, if you tell me he bring him back. Risky AF. But he did that shit, dog. Legit went to get his bro, man. Dead or not, didn't care. Man, you about to tell me, dog, I'm about to press
body and hauled him back up into the bell. Once Chris's body was inside the bell, Duncan, the bellman, removed Chris's helmet, and he saw that his face was blue and he was totally lifeless. But Duncan immediately just gave him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. And after giving him 2 big breaths, Chris came back to life. He started gagging and coughing, and he's looking around wide-eyed, and Duncan and Dave were looking at him like, you gotta be kidding me, you're supposed to be dead. And after about 30 seconds, the color in Chris's face had totally come back, and he was looking at Duncan and Dave and asked them, what happened? And Duncan and Dave didn't have an answer for him. And so instead, all 3 men just started laughing and hugging. They could not believe it. Once Chris was brought back up.
If he would have not, I'm not about to get emotional in this video. I'll tell you, I ain't even about to get mad at this video. If he would have accepted that we lost, bro, they would have really lost, bro. Stop playing with me,
So
dog.
instead, all three men just started laughing and hugging. They could not believe it. Once Chris was brought back up to the ship, the dive medic looked at him and concluded that nothing was wrong with him. He was perfectly fine, despite the fact he had been without an air supply for over 30 minutes. And 3 weeks after the incident, Chris was back.
Oh! Except the first dude. But, okay. His was more of his own decision. Like, I'm sorry, the math wasn't math on that one. But these other two stories, they legit said they were not going. No, like, no, they were not about to fucking die. Not that easy. It just hit me. Both of these dudes should have been far past dead. We can all see that a mile away. But hell no. I'm telling you, dog, the human body is strong. Look, I'm not gonna get into this shit. Look, man, I'm sorry, man. At one point, I just really got to pay attention to Mr. Ballen's words. I was the way he's speaking, it's gonna be a survival story. I ain't gonna lie. The bullet one, that one got me. I ain't gonna lie. His whole storytelling had me on the loop. I was not expecting it, even though I kind of did, but I was expecting it because I was thinking of that chapter. Regardless, all right. But this one, I started paying attention a little more. Like, hold up, dog. Stop playing with me, man. It didn't sound like it. It didn't sound like he was about to go. It didn't.
Him and concluded that nothing was wrong with him. He was perfectly fine, despite the fact he had been without an air supply for over 30 minutes. And 3 weeks after the incident, Chris was back down saturation diving again. Today, scientists don't know how Chris survived. The leading theory is that it was just so cold it slowed his heart and his brain down.
I couldn't do it. I told you. Look, I don't be trying to deride none of that when I be giving props to people like this, dog. Because shit like this to me, it's beautiful. I tell you all the time, when we watch those hiking stories or mountain climbing stories, I do that too a little bit. But the way people do it, and they be like, yeah, I think I'm about to go chill in the forest for a day or two. I don't care. It's beautiful, man. It really is. I wish I could do that by myself. The most I can do is hike by myself, but I'm going back home, dog. Most of the time when I do other stuff like that, camping, whatever, we're with people. But if people who just go do it by themselves, I'm sorry. Y'all call them crazy all y'all want. I'll be reading the comments. I don't look at it that way. I'm sorry, dog. I really don't.
And concluded that nothing was wrong with him. He was perfectly fine, despite the fact he had been without an air supply for over 30 minutes. And 3 weeks after the incident, Chris was back down saturation diving again. Today, scientists don't know how Chris survived. The leading theory is that it was just so cold, it slowed his heart and his brain down, and that somehow kept him alive. But the reality is, his survival is a total mystery. Yeah, here is what the crew saw when their remote-controlled vehicle found Chris lying on top of that platform. So that's going to do it, guys. If you found the secret...
I'm so glad he went down there for his bro, dog. I always had one up on my nigga, boy. Well, I know you ain't talking shit, nigga. I could have left your ass. We understand it's a joke. I don't know about them. Me and my niggas, we would joke about it. Stop playing with me, boy. Yeah, I heard you cry. King, don't die, King. I bet y'all know what that's from. That just proved my point, too. I know we would have joked about ours. That's from Men's Society, dog. When his partner almost died, he was holding. They was scared as shit. You know what I'm saying? They thought his partner would die, but he didn't die. So afterwards, they was laughing about it. Because when you had those moments where you almost legit die, where it's like life or death, strangely, they become funny as ish. I think I told y'all hella mine on the channel. They become funny because it's like, yo, I could have just fucking lost my life. The damn dog was chewing my damn neck. Oh shit, I didn't take my headphones off this outro. My bad, dog. This one really had me. This storytelling wise, I ain't gonna lie. I almost on Chris' story, I almost turned it off. I'm not gonna lie to you. The way Mr. Ball was telling that story, and I ain't gonna lie, I thought it was a Left 4 Dead moment. Not gonna lie to you, dude. I was like, yeah, I don't want to hear this story no more. This shit is not about to be amazing. You know, I thought about like, yo, we're about to get a damn picture of this issue. I was like, I really hope it ain't the body. Show us the damn infrastructure, whatever. But then once he let us know, like, yo, he survived everything, I was like, all right, now show it. I want to see it now. Hey, I'm out. Enjoy your day. Morning, evening, night. Whatever you watch this video, dog. I'm out.